Welcome everybody to a Plexus pop-up conversation. One of the things that we really love about these conversations is that although there is a little minimum structure, so the minimum viable structure for it not to just be completely random, and to give both the person who has graciously volunteered to lead the conversation, and then even more importantly to everybody else, enough structures those worthwhile for their time and interest, and hopefully to sort of launch some interesting conversations. But at the same time, it's open enough so that we can really have what I know that Lorenz is going to be sharing, a generative dialogue. And that means that our ideas and thoughts and what emerges in the moment is really exciting and should be shared. So Lorenz Sell from Sutra has been someone who I've been chatting with over the last few months, and as a friend and colleague of Amanda Lyons, Plexus Catalyst and board member, who introduced us. And it's been fascinating. So I'm not going to set it up too much other than to say that I hope everybody enjoys this as much as I anticipate I will. Thanks, Lorenz.
Thank you, Denise. And hello, everyone. My name is Lorenz. A very big thank you to Denise for inviting me to speak today, and to Amanda, who's on the call, for introducing me to Plexus and Denise. So, yeah, like Denise said, I'd love to have this be a very open and kind of generative conversation. I'll speak a little bit about the origin and inspiration of this work and what we are trying to do. And then I'll show you guys a little bit about what we have done. And I would love to then open it up to everybody to kind of weigh in. And also feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have questions. So the origin of this work started around 2011. I've been a tech entrepreneur since 2004, but right around priority that revolved around finding ways to connect people in more meaningful ways. And having been an internet entrepreneur, I was really interested in what that meant online. Was it possible to create deep levels of empathy and connection in a very genuine way online? And it took a number of years for me to really crystallize what that even meant, and what that might look like. And there was a process of trial and error, of really trying lots of different experiments to try to synthesize something tangible, because in the beginning this was very intangible. It was just a very broad aspiration. And one of the kind of pivotal moments of crystallization actually happened when I met Amanda through an online course out of MIT by the Presencing Institute, with a guy named Professor Otto Scharmer. And there were 30,000 people taking this online course. And one of the things they did was they broke us up into groups of 5 people. And I ended up taking the course twice, once with a physical group of 5 people in New York City. And that's where I was introduced to Theory U, to their particular structure, their case clinic format. And what I got out of that experience was, wow, I feel very connected to these people. It was one of the first times that I had an online experience where I felt a deep sense of a relationship. And this was in early 2015, and even now, obviously, I'm still connected to Amanda, and so many of those relationships have lasted. And I came out of that experience, and I went to my wife and I said, listen, I think there's something really powerful in this idea that you can take a very large group of people and break them into smaller groups of people. So we had 30,000 when we went to a group of 5. And then that was really a recipe for connecting people in a deeper way. And so this was the origin of the software that I started building, very much just initially around this idea of and then in order for them to feel work has evolved. It's really evolved deeper levels of connection, and even more so potentially an experience of collective intelligence or generative dialogue. And what does that even mean? Is that possible in an online context? So the first line of code for this software project for Sutra was written in early 2015. And a few months later, we deployed it in a co-working space as a way to kind of gather around projects. And it didn't go very far. The biggest challenge we came up against initially was lack of engagement. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges with online community software, or just community period, is engagement. People, if you're going to have generative engagement of any kind, well, everybody needs to be engaged. But particularly with a piece of software, it's very challenging to get people to use something new and engage in the way that you might like them to. And so this has been a big exploration for us. And through trying our approach in different contexts, one of the answers that we found was that learning can be a way to build community, and can be an incentive or a catalyst for engagement. And so we initially used our software with a program out of Harvard, the Harvard program in refugee trauma, where they have a 9-month blended learning program that is heavily small group focused. And we were able to kind of take the way they'd been doing it and bring it onto our software, and it worked really well. It was one of the first times that we saw near 100% engagement across all the students, and so this kind of sparked the idea that to create these kinds of experiences that were much more oriented around dialogue, much more oriented around community, and much more ideally oriented around kind of how can we learn together in more generative ways, and how can we help educators or individuals or organizations create these kinds of learning experiences that bring people together in unique ways, that foster collaboration, and that kind of explore this concept of generativity, which honestly I'm just starting to explore as well. So I think that kind of brings you up to speed in terms of the origin and the intention behind the work. And I want to just kind of pause here for a second and just check in with everyone to see if what I've made if what I've said has made sense. Does anyone have any questions? Any comments so far? All right, I got a thumbs up. I'll take that as a positive feedback. So far, so good. Thank you. So I think maybe at this point I'll show you guys what we've been up to, and I just want to preface with what I'm saying with everything that we have been doing has been an ongoing experiment and exploration, and quite honestly, we have no idea what we're doing. There is just this aspiration to use the internet and create a tool that connects people in deeper and more authentic ways. And so the software, when it was first built, it did not even have any intention to be a piece of learning software. And I hardly even knew what generativity meant back then. Not that I know what it means now, but I knew much less what it meant back then. And so all of this software has evolved through an iterative approach of literally trying it out with new groups of people, new communities, new courses. And learning from every experience and iterating on a monthly, weekly, sometimes daily basis. We'll deploy it in a course, and we'll observe something and be like, well, maybe we should try this. And so all of it everything in that sense has been developed in this way. So I'll just jump in to sharing my screen, and hopefully that works.
Yeah, can I interrupt you for a minute, Lorenz?
Yeah.
Hi, it's Amanda, guys.
Hi, Amanda.
Excited to see you, and I just wanted to kind of highlight what Lorenz just said and how much of an amazing thing it's been to watch and sort of hear about the continual sort of patterns of understanding that Lorenz and Natasha have been finding throughout, and really appreciate how much of a complexity journey it has been as well, seeing as a lot of folks here in the Plexus community are all about complexity. So I just wanted to say hello, say I'm super excited that you're here, and I can't wait to continue this conversation. So.
Yeah, and it's such a unique treat to have Amanda here, because Amanda has literally been there from day one in this course that I mentioned. When I was first, I think I probably did a coaching circle around this before any of this code was written. So she has absolutely been witness to this very complex and evolving process that I have been unfolding here. All right, so let's try this. Share screen. Cool. Okay. So, I've never given a demo to this many people before. So usually when it's one-on-one, it's I can kind of ask for feedback along the way. But I'm going to do my best, and hopefully it works out. So Sutra is designed to be one of the kind of design aspirations for this software has always been to be very flexible in the sense that it originally started as a piece of kind of community collaboration software, and then we evolved it to be able to support learning experiences. But we never wanted the software to be a piece of learning management software. Like there are many different kinds of learning management platforms out there, and when you're in that platform, it's specifically designed for learning, and you wouldn't necessarily use it for anything outside of learning. With Sutra, the aspiration was always to keep it so flexible that it could be used for learning, but it could also be used for collaboration. It could also be used for community. And that has sometimes been a challenge. And it's also been a challenge because it can make it more difficult to understand how to use Sutra. But I like to think that once you understand, it becomes very, very simple. So there's two basic building blocks in the software. There's what we call a pod, which is a grouping of people. So these are all these group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4. These are all different pods, also called discussions. And then there is a space, which is basically a container of pods. So a space would be a community. It could be a course. In this case, the space is called Illumined Woman, and this is a course that we have on Sutra, a women's meditation course that takes place. Each person who registers for it gets put into a group of 5 to 8 people, and then their learning experience happens through that group. So on a surface level, the software can almost appear to be a little similar to kind of popular messaging services like Slack, where you have, I think in Slack they're called channels. You have channels and you have a workspace. So if you're going to use that metaphor, a pod might be considered a channel, and a workspace might be considered a space. But beyond that, we have a number of approaches that we've taken to be different that kind of reflect a difference from that paradigm. So when you're inside a pod, much of the interface is real-time chat. Your first experience is real-time chat. It's kind of very easy to very low barrier to entry. And again, the emphasis of everything we do is dialogue, conversation, and connection. Everything we have been trying to figure out is how do you get people to share deeply and openly? How do you create a safe space? So it's been, I think with traditional learning experiences, the emphasis is on the content. And with the experiences that we work with the educators and organizations that we work with, our emphasis is always on the connection and on the conversation. So that is, I think that's also reflected in the interface when you come here. The first thing you encounter is the conversation, not the content. So when you're here, you have access to something called resources, which is basically, that's where you have the learning content that you might expect. You can publish modules which have subsections. In these subsections, you can have video, audio, images, links, the regular stuff that you might expect. So does that make sense so far? Does anyone have any questions while I'm talking away here? All right. Please, by all means, interrupt me if you do, because now I'm going to get into some of the slightly more unique features that we've gotten into that have been trying to really unpack what generativity might be online. So one of the things I observed early on in working with small groups was the role of structure. So, to go back to the Presencing Institute course I had, the experience we had, they broke us up into groups of 5 people, and they gave us the case clinic template, which I call a structure. It was a way to kind of self-facilitate our interaction, and with that, we were able to get to much deeper levels of connection. And as I've worked with a lot of small groups since then, I have found that without a structure, it's very difficult to get to a kind of break below the surface of just casual interaction. And then also through Amanda introduced me to liberating structures, which I'm seeing a message here on the chat. Oh. Okay, cool. Let me just read this real quick. You talk about learning as a driver to create real engagement via your software, but there are a lot of resources you can learn from. There are community creations aimed at marketing towards consumers. There are e-learning experience. There are platforms like Facebook and Google. So my question is, in what way is your software original and does things differently and originally compared to other ways of connecting and facilitating engagement and dialogue? Awesome question, and I am hopeful that I am about to answer that question. What I found is that these types of structures, whether they're liberating structures or any number of other kind of circle process oriented templates for interaction, are instrumental in group cohesion and group connection. And so we have been exploring a lot around what that means in both an asynchronous environment where you have chat, so people aren't necessarily together at the same time in the same place, and in a synchronous environment like online video. So in a synchronous environment, the structures obviously work really well. You can take almost any structure and many of the liberating structures and go through them in a video experience, and they tend to work pretty well. One of the things that we were interested in is can you apply a similar structure into an asynchronous conversation? And so one of the features we created, if you notice here, we have these kind of green bar sections. These are all scripted. So the person creating the learning experience can create a script of prompts that will be injected into the chat experience that can go out at at whatever sequence you want. It could be every other hour, every other day, once a week, or whatever. But this experience, this idea that an online course can be a sequence of prompts that are designed to foster deeper engagement and connection. So if you have, so you think about a traditional online learning experience, it's usually a bunch of content and then the person consumes that content. one of the things that we've been exploring is, what if instead of, or in addition to that content, you can bring a group of people together and then take them through a sequence of prompts designed to deepen their interaction. If you think about like in person, there are kind of pros and cons to both environments. In person, you have the spontaneity and you have the ability to kind of see the person and experience their energy and connect in that way. But asynchronous in chat, you have the opportunity to really reflect deeply. You have the opportunity to really take your time to read something and to reflect deeply and to craft a response. So there's also a benefit there, and kind of exploring how you can tap into that through different kinds of sequences of prompts and the relationship between the synchronous and the asynchronous. So I think to also answer this question a little more specifically about how is our software original, so on some level, like our software provides a very kind of basic level of connectivity, right? This chat. And then on another level, there are specific features that we are trying to build and understand that can support deeper levels of engagement. And then on another level, it's part technology and part process and part content. So it's like, you bring people together in a group, it's part that, just bringing people together, right? But without the structure, and I'm talking about like a real world group, without a process, that group may not be able to may not reach a deeper level of engagement. So it's part process, right? And then the other part, particularly in the online experience, is it's part content. So, why are these people here? And I think that's really where one of the answers we found to the why question was, if you have a learning experience that people are interested in, it gives them an incentive and a reason to be engaged, and that becomes a catalyst for engagement. But beyond that, it's how do you deepen that engagement, particularly online, where people are super busy, they're all got their own thing going on, they've got a million different things they're doing at the same time, and so this has been something that we are actively trying to deconstruct. So another feature that we have built, let's see where I have this here. Okay, great. Is being able to observe levels of participation in a group. So I kind of, as I've been researching this, another body of research I've encountered is also out of MIT. This guy named Alex Pentland, who has a very, very interesting book called Social Physics. And it all revolves around kind of collective intelligence. And so in his research, he says that the single biggest indicator of collective intelligence in a group is equality of participation. It trumps any individual's expertise or IQ, or talents or skills. Equality of participation. And I thought this is kind of like a phenomenal piece of research, that when you have a group of people that are equally contributing to an exchange, that kind of creates this deep level of social cohesion and intelligence. And so one of the this is a very recent feature that we've been experimenting with, is being able to visualize levels of participation by word count, and then emailing people once a week feedback on where they're at. So if they're a top contributor, maybe congratulating them and inviting them to engage other people by mentioning them, or if they're at the bottom of the scale, just suggesting that that they might that they might contribute more. Like, we haven't found an answer to this yet, right? These are the challenges we're dealing with. Again, I think one of the biggest challenges with running these kinds of online groups is the human factor, right? So you've got let's say you have an online course that you're hosting where you've got 100 people that have registered, and you put them into 10 groups of 10 people. There is kind of what the software does, and then there's the process you take them through, but then there are the individuals and with their own quirks and idiosyncrasies, and some people are there for different things, and kind of how do you work with all of that with a piece of software, and and kind of deliver an experience that is based on collective participation, right? With a traditional experience, you give them the content, they might pay for it, and it's great, have fun, you can read it or not. But with an experience where one of the things that you're promising to deliver is the collective experience, it very much depends on the participation of each person. And so one of our challenges has been, how do you optimize and maximize to the extent possible? Is inevitably, there will be humans that show up that just aren't going to participate. But to the extent possible, how do you optimize and maximize the conditions that will serve to bring people together? So, so I think I've covered a lot of the basics here. And again, I saw another question here. Have you found that there is a process needed for closure after conversation? So absolutely. This goes back to kind of something that we're very actively exploring with every iteration of every course that we do, is the opening process, kind of what happens during the course, and then the closing process, trying to kind of identify where people drop off, and these, particularly like opening and closing, are very important. Opening is very important is because that's where you really have an opportunity to establish norms of participation, to set the expectations, to give people feedback about how you hope they will interact. And you have a very short window of time to do that in. People come in, there's a lot of initial excitement, and there's literally like 2-3 days, max 7 days to really like get that snowball moving. And in our early trials, we quickly encountered how a bunch of people come together, and just dissolves, the energy dissolves. And so one of our challenges has been really looking at that onboarding process the first few days, and kind of harnessing that collective energy and building on it. And then at the conclusion, the closing process is important for two reasons. One is that to provide closure to an experience. So one of the biggest things that we try to accomplish is this concept of safe space. Creating a safe space where people are willing to be vulnerable and open, and share deeply. And so providing closure to that, but also how do you take the experience that they've just had and transform it into a longer lasting community? Right? This is really what the software is built for. It's built to deliver a learning experience, but then carry that learning experience into an ongoing community where people can potentially collaborate to create. They can create their own. They can create their own groups. They can create their own spaces. And so we have a number of communities where that actually happens. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to kind of bridge that. But that's really one of the biggest aspirations behind the software. So I see a few more questions here. Do you share this data with everyone during the course? Have you had a learning guide teacher significantly shift the prompts based on the data and conversations that are happening? The answer to, let's see, do you share the data? We're figuring that out right now. This data is, it's up to the course creator whether or not people have access to this data. So you can either allow everybody to see it. I think one of the features we're going to build is that if you are not a staff, if you're not an administrator of the space, you can only see your place. One of the things we really hope we want to completely avoid is any sense of shaming. And so in this kind of feedback process, particularly with people that are not participating or contributing, we really want to be delicate about how we approach giving them feedback so that they don't feel any sense of shame. And so, being able to look at this data to see your position, but not necessarily see, that someone else isn't participating is very important to us. So as far as learning teacher guide, significantly shifting prompts, because a lot of the work we're doing right now is extremely explorative, this stuff is shifting all the time. So the answer to that is absolutely. We're literally looking at participation both on a kind of data level and an intuitive level, trying to understand, what, how to adjust and how to optimize the engagement both on a software and a content level. So it's constantly evolving day by day with every, we consider every experience that we run to be extremely valuable because this is real people on our platform, many of whom for these kinds of experiences, for this particular course, it's a $400 course. So people pay $400. And it's extremely valuable for us to have real people that we can observe and work with, to understand this challenge more. I am not clear if you were talking about primarily bringing people together in written chat room or live video interaction. So in these experiences, we have both kinds and hybrid models. This particular course is a hybrid course where people get together over video once a week. They also they start with kind of a course-wide call, and then they go out into breakout groups based on their pods, and they go through a process. They go through something very similar to the Theory U case clinic process. We're actually in our next iteration, we're going to try some liberating structure type processes to see how that works. We have other experiences that are entirely text-based, and one of the things that we try to understand is the relationship between the two and kind of the levels of connection you can have in either environment. Your software development does not take into account the necessity of specific tools for a person, assuming the fostering of the community connection. I'm not sure I understand that question. Your software development does not take into account the necessity of specific tools for a person, assuming the fostering of the community connection. Michael, do you want to unmute yourself and share your question over audio? Maybe not. Have you included any, I can't unmute, okay. Have you included an initial getting ready to engage module for participants to set them up to get the most out of an online engagement experience? Yeah, so that is something that we are exploring. We probably haven't done as much as we could there. There's the initial calls and I guess onboarding that might happen through some material in the course content in the course orientation. Let me see here. So here in the welcome section, I think we could do a much better job of onboarding people in a more sophisticated way. There's very little kind of technological introduction. So I think at this point I'm going to kind of go back to the main call here, and if there's a need to go back to the software, we can do that, and I'd love to open it up to the conversation here. Yeah. Okay. Does anyone have any comments?
Hi, it's Denise. Can you hear me? Yes, I
Hi,
think
Denise.
so. Perfect. I do have a few questions, and thank you. That was really fabulous. And sorry, Michael, that we've been sort of trying to unmute you and you can't speak, but please feel free to continue to share to any extent possible by writing, because it seems like you're coming from a specific point of view, and I'd really love to know more about that.
Me
but
too.
a question that I have, Lorenz, really has to do again with because it is a generative dialogue and conversation, and that the experience is seems to be as equally as important as the learning and the learning content and the connections that ultimately emerge from it. How often have you found that there has been all of a sudden, at some point during the course, it becomes a co-created experience, so that the learning guide says, this is basically what we're going to cover, and then based on the engagements and the responses to prompts, et cetera, it becomes pretty evident that it needs to take a significant shift, and that it's the responsibility of the learners as well as the learning guide / teacher.
That's a very interesting question. It's challenging. I want to preface everything I've said with this work is very challenging. What we've found is there does come a point where there is a certain there seems to be a certain tipping point where people begin to share very deeply, and they begin to very much kind of reap the benefits of their collective connection. But and this is the really kind of tricky rabbit hole part of this whole thing. For example, in this Illuminum course that I've just been demonstrating to you, we have a number of groups going through the exact same sequence of prompts, the exact same calls and everything. We have some groups that reach that tipping point, and we have some that don't, right? So we have some groups that after 2 or 3 weeks, all of a sudden you can just see the conversation, the length of the posts gets longer, the conversation deepens. At the conclusion of the course, some of the members decide to continue practicing the material together in their group. So there's very much this kind of ideal aspirational behavior. And at the same time, you have a group of people that went through the exact same process, and they're barely interacting. And so that's been a big challenge for us to understand what causes that and how we can somehow mitigate that. I see some more questions coming in here. So can you share the range of use cases for this? Who or in what settings are people finding it most useful? Yeah, so there are a range of applications that we feel the software is suitable for. So one is this kind of small group learning experience. So also going back to the differences between, say, something like Slack or whatever, the other thing that our software is really optimized around that I haven't shown you at all is managing large groups of people and breaking them into smaller groups of people. So we can process all the registration, all the payment stuff. You can run surveys against people and then break them up into groups based on survey answers. So for example, someone registers, you can collect their time zone or their interest and then break them up into pods based on their answers. So there's a lot of features we've built that kind of optimize managing populations of people. And so that might also be something that's useful organizationally. One of the interests with our software has been around community and particularly community governance. So we have community decision-making. So we have, for example, we have a community, and this is kind of a yoga umbrella organization called the Kundalini Research Institute. They have 700 teacher trainers. And so they use our software with their teacher trainers to discuss topics, make decisions, and they basically use the software almost like a discussion forum where they post, people can create a pod around a discussion, and then people can participate in that discussion. In another use case, we have, for example, with this Harvard group, they have a number of concurrent spaces that run. So some of these spaces are entirely locked down, as in the pods are created by the administrators, the content is added to the administrators, and people cannot create their own pods. And then there's an open space for collaboration where people create their own pods. They can post projects they want to collaborate with other people with. They can collaboratively contribute to the resources, and kind of connect with each other that way. And then I think the biggest thing that we're really trying to deconstruct is how can you provide people with tools and resources that are very practical and accessible to reach deeper levels of connection. So, you know, almost like if you think about a tool set for deeper levels of connection is liberating structures. And it works really well. You have a group of people, they can pick a structure depending on what they're dealing with, and then they can go through that and they can help them get deeper levels of insight and this sense of kind of collective intelligence. I think one of the aspirations of Sutra is to really provide people with a similar tool set of, you know, you want to explore something more deeply or discuss something more deeply, you can maybe look at a database of different tools that you might use or best practices, and bring those into your engagement or your community. Let's see. Michael Keller's question is close to mine. He asks about onboarding. My question is about the necessity of someone who fosters the quality of the dialogue and the community relations between the participants. I hope I'm expressing myself better. I think I understand that in terms of, the way I understand that question is in terms of the need and role of a facilitator, and to kind of guide the group. And so this is really a big part of what our software is also trying to deconstruct, is how can you either automate or scale functions of facilitation? So, you know, you imagine you want to create these kinds of experiences. So in one scenario, you could have, you know, say you have 100 people come in, you could break them up into 10 groups of 10 people, and then maybe you have a facilitator that you put into every single group. Well, that's a lot of overhead. You know, in another example, kind of what the ULab experience with the Presencing Institute is like, is where they're like, you know, here's 30,000 people, break out into your 5 groups. Here's a template. You guys self-facilitate. And I think that model is really what we are trying to support on a software basis. Is, okay, you want to build a community like this or a learning experience like this. Well, here are best practices. Here are tools. And here's how you can approach it. And so you can basically scale your role as a facilitator to be able to potentially kind of supervise 10 groups, 10 groups of 10 people or more. And this has been also something that we've been exploring with supervision groups. So if you're familiar with the Ballant groups or anything like that, where you have, you know, Ballant groups are basically small groups where doctors, you know, five or so doctors will support each other by sharing, you know, challenges that they're facing. And so being able to have a whole bunch of support groups in a community and have, you know, 1 or 2 supervisors over those groups to just be able to kind of look in over conversations and make sure they're running or provide structure to those conversations. Stuff like that is something that we are very interested in exploring and supporting. Have you recognized any specific characteristics of the groups that reach tipping point or not? I'm not sure, honestly. This is really kind of breaking into new ground for us, and is very much at the heart of what we're trying to understand. I'm not, you know, I'm also not necessarily a data analyst or researcher by nature. So much of this is also me trying to figure out how to make sense of the data that we have and what data we should be looking at. And so you know, on that level, I also welcome anyone who has experience, expertise, or interest in these subjects to reach out to me to look at some of this interaction data and try to make sense of it. because this is very much at the heart of what we're trying to understand. Without shaming, is it possible to have one of the expectations of the experience radical transparency? This could be extremely useful for the group. Interest and intention does not always equate to value to self or value to group. I'm not sure I understand that. Denise, I think that one came from you. Do you want to speak about that?
It did. And it's sort of, I'm leading up to this big question. This is the big question for me anyway. Having been a educational technologist for a number of years, and also, as everyone in Plexus knows, the whole concept at the core of everything we do is using engagement to sort of, unlock and then to support the properties of complex systems thinking and human interactions, human dynamics. So with that being said, there's a question that I have in any group dynamic, that if you're very intentional about, here we're setting the intentions, or here are the guidelines that we hope this group will follow. There are people who come in, as you said, and are very enthusiastic, are committed, and then it stops, it closes up completely, and without being able to have the group and the individual explain why. So why did Denise stop attending the classes, and why did her long post become something shorter or non-existent? What was it that happened either in the group or with Denise that did not allow the next level of engagement to occur, and consequently may have sort of cut off the dynamics within the group and sort of made it stale? I mean, sort of, it didn't go anywhere. So I was thinking that you could potentially, and it might not be just an open random group of people, but say we really do want to have radical transparency, and we are going to share the fact it's never meant to be a shaming, and Denise can say, I'm out, and she steps out. But why is of a group of 5,500 people at Plexus, why are there 50 people who are absolutely positively engaged in what's happening in the organization, and 5,450 that are just visitors? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think the question you're asking is much of what we're trying to answer. This kind of radical transparency, I think, revolves around safe space, and creating an environment where people feel comfortable speaking at that level of honesty. This isn't for me, I'm going to step out of it, or whatever. So one of the challenges with this work is the human factor. Is that a person might just not be interested, or they might be interested and they might be quiet. Like, I'm going to just bring the attention to ourselves in this call. Everyone is here and everyone's relatively quiet. Does that mean people aren't interested? Is that, so there's a number of factors that we have to kind of break through. Part of it is breaking through the ice. And so there's those aspects. If we were all together in a room with a whiteboard and we had Amanda doing her sketchnoting, and we went through some liberating structure process, probably in a couple of hours we'd be high-fiving each other and feel super close. But even so, a couple of people might not be into it, and they might be like, this just isn't me. I don't believe in technology being used this way. So, I think there's always the human factor. There's part of it is the software challenge, and part of it is the human factor challenge. And I think from our end, it's really trying to understand how much the software can address the human factor challenge. And if someone's just not interested, they're not interested. But if they are and they feel shy, or there is something about the software or the process that can help break through that ice faster, I think that's really what we hope to understand more. And by understanding it, we hope to create either features or resources or best practices that we can then offer to people to be able to create these experiences themselves, where they can take a piece of software and they can basically have a tool set to be able to generate deeper levels of engagement. Let's see, I see some more things popping in here. Bill says, Denise's mention of radical transparency triggers essential curiosity for me around Ray Dalio's work on principles. I am intrigued by the iPad app that shows up in his TED Talk, where every person in a large meeting of about 30 people are constantly providing and accessing an assessment of how valuable each person's contribution is. Does anyone have further insights into this process and its outcome? That's a great reflection, and I think that's also partially kind of our aspiration with that spider diagram chart I showed you, being able to kind of somehow give people real-time feedback on their contribution. I think you might be saying something slightly different, an assessment of how valuable each person's contribution is. Can you maybe share a link on that TED Talk or something, or or if you want to speak about it right now, please feel free to.
I'll just clarify real quickly, Renz, that the individuals are actually making their own assessment of each person. So it's just there at any one moment whether this person is truthful, believable, full of shit. All that stuff is just constantly coming in, aggregated, and everybody can look at that in the moment.
That seems very transparent and honest, radically honest.
Well, yeah, the whole approach that he has with his company, the hedge fund, is quite interesting. But I will send the link right away, because both his talk and the example that he's showing of this meeting, I think, is very relevant to what you're doing. Okay,
I would love that. And I've also seen his book. Is that does that explain that work more deeply? Do you know?
I have read the book, and I would say the TED Talk is the best way to get introduced to the whole thing. And then the book goes into a lot more detail, but the TED Talk is very succinct.
Great, thank you. Amanda says, yes, the idea of being able to say why I am not engaging so much. There's usually a reason, and to get emails based on my word count, which doesn't necessarily feel like it equates to the quality of what someone says. Right, and that's, how do you measure like the qualitative aspect of contribution or listening, right, in a piece of software? I think there's probably levels of artificial intelligence that can be applied to that challenge. We haven't delved into that, but I think that's a big point there, is trying to get a little deeper with feedback, and actually this is an interesting idea to be able to capture from people why they're not engaging so much, maybe in a not in the is this part of a formal academic research project? No, this is not a formal academic research project. So we are an LLC. One of my intentions with this work is to make it an open source project. And really to, because I have a deep passion for community, one of my intentions is really to kind of explore what community participation and ownership could be for a project like this. I think, my ideal aspiration for this work is that it's a deeply community supported open source platform for generative community engagement. Do people in a pod know each other? Is the relational capital important in fostering generative dialogue? So in many of the pods, people do not know each other. I think in some of the communities we run, people do know each other. Most of the courses we run, because people register for a course, there's a bunch of strangers. And they do not know each other. So there's a process we go through around, breaking the ice and getting them comfortable with each other. In generative learning and engagement groups, it seems that emergence of new views along with the tension it can evoke is something to honor as essential to transformative learning potentials, growing beyond current paradigms' comfort in making meaning. How might this be supported intentionally and constructively for participants becoming learners differently? I absolutely love that question. And I welcome input on that question, because I think this is kind of central to some of the aspiration here. If anyone here has read Pedagogy of the Oppressed, this idea of student teachers and teacher learners, the software is very much designed around this idea of collaborative real world experience. And even the resources that I showed you, you can either, as an educator, can contribute their own resources. And we have a number of features that I showed you that allow you to save comments, messages, and to a kind of a collaborative note section, and then potentially take those notes and put them into resources. So there's also kind of an aspect of this whole experience that I haven't talked about around kind of collaborative knowledge generation, which I think is a big part of collaborative learning. And to kind of speak a little bit to this idea is this is one of the central reasons we've kept the software flexible, as not entirely a learning platform and not entirely a community platform, but more of a kind of collaborative learning community platform. Is very much this idea that the ideal learning happens in a collaborative real world context. So if you're going to do that, you need software that can function in that context, just like you would use any collaborative software. And that's really been a kind of a core design aspiration of our work. I hypothesize that the key ingredient for Dalio, Keegan, and Leahy DDOs, by the way, the Keegan and Leahy also a huge inspiration to this work, and one of the most profound learning experiences I've had online was their edX course as well. Has to do with the quality of the person facilitating, curating, and leading the process as opposed to the technology. So yeah, and I think the answer to that in a way, as far as quality, is around self-facilitation. In kind of the model that I think Otto Scharmer has done a really good job with their case clinic, is they have this course that is basically, they break out into groups which become self-facilitated. So I think there is no question that there is tremendous value in facilitated groups, and I think in that sense our software, or our hope, would be to be very helpful to facilitators to make their job easier in online facilitated groups. I'm not sure how useful it might be in entirely offline groups, but also for communities and learning experiences that are maybe don't have the resources, or are simply at a scale where small group facilitation doesn't make sense, that we might provide a way to approach this quality through a self-facilitated process, which again is definitely not entirely technology, right? It's part technology, part process, part content. And so I think when you look at our software on a purely technology basis, there's obviously a lot missing, and I think there's a lot missing both because we're just figuring it out, and because it's just it can't be the whole picture in its own right. That there is elements of process and content that go into that equation, and we're also trying to understand how we can provide support on those two functions.
Lorenz, do you mind
yeah.
if I comment on
Please.
this a second? Because I asked that question.
Please.
Which is that, and I'm maybe exposing something about myself as perhaps a reluctant technology user, sort of Luddite type of guy. And this would be an interesting longer discussion. But however you get around it, I'm not convinced that I'm convinced technology is a key facilitating ingredient. But I doubt that it's foundational. There's something in the way that you're taught, the self-facilitation works and a facilitator works in a group that holds the space. In other words, the technology, I doubt, has the heart and the spirit to hold the space.
Can you speak about that?
Well, it's like, I'm going to look at that. Bill, I appreciate your putting in that Ray Dalio video. I'm really fascinated to look at it. So, because what we get captivated about, I think, in the business literature is some technical technique or mechanism that people use. Oh, he's got this online thing in this rating system. I would bet that this has a lot to do with who Ray Dalio is and how he sets that into motion. I would guess that the self-facilitation works in the same way. And so don't get me wrong. I'm very excited about this platform. You've put something here I got to learn about, and technology is key in this era we're in. But at the heart, I would say there's got to be some person or group of people holding the space. There's got to be heart and spirit. Yeah. And we're at the end, and it's too long to talk about now. But I'd be fascinated to dive into this deeper sometime.
I would too, and I think you're 100% right. And I will be honest and say, that as a person who is deeply interested in creating deep levels of very genuine, heartfelt human connection, I often have to confront the kind of paradox of doing it through an online piece of software. Shouldn't people just get offline and do that? And so I think that I also often confront that kind of philosophical challenge within myself. And I think also, to speak to what you're saying, all of our communities and courses do revolve around people. So there's a person who is organizing that community or that course. So it's there isn't just a kind of a blanket kind of, here's a community you can jump in. I think every group of people in general, I would imagine, benefit from some form of leadership, and that is very much this kind of space that is contained, and also kind of beyond the scope of this conversation. What does a community mean? The kind of expectations and values and norms of participation in a community. That there's a beyond just kind of the technical ingredients for a generative interaction. There is also the technical components of a community. And these are all things that we are trying to understand more deeply, and kind of the role that technology or a piece of software can play in that. And it might be that the technology or software is not needed in that equation. So something I am trying to understand myself. Let's see, there's another comment here. I wonder if using the structure of adaptive positive deviance to uncover folks who may not be the most active offers another dimension of how to value engagement and contribution. Up on the hour mark. And if there are any additional thoughts and feedback, please share. Great. Well, I think this is a good time to conclude. I'm very grateful to have had this opportunity to share this work with you. And if you feel at all inclined to continue this conversation, please feel free to email me, lorenz@sutra.co.co, or visit our website, sutra.co, sign up for our podcast. I would love to hear from you, and I very much welcome any feedback or thought on this work. This is very much an unfolding and ongoing and highly iterative journey that I hope will have a very human-serving conclusion. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, everybody. And really, thank you so much, Lorenz. It has just been fabulous. And I'm going to add one more ask. If anybody has a particular project learning area or model or something that they think might be a terrific experiment using Sutra, let Lorenz and us know, because we're really looking. I mean, some of the questions Lorenz has been asking are the questions that are, as I said, are at the very heart of what Plexus continues to ask. And the concept of being able to jointly create this new type of generative dialogue and conversation is applicable to virtually any organization and any initiative. So let us know. We're ready to play in the sand with everybody. So thank you. And thank you, Lorenz. And I will stop the recording now and hope to see you next week at our next pop-up. And if you're interested in running a pop-up or have any other ideas, please feel free to let us know and share what's happening at Plexus with your social media groups and organizations. Thanks, everybody.